For those of you who are new to AIS, we are Associated Independent Stores and we're the leading independent buying group for home and fashion in the UK and Ireland. We have a buying throughput of around £500 million from more than 300 retail stores, including department stores, garden centres and specialist stores, which include sports stores. We work exclusively with independents, which can range from single stores to regional chains with a combined retail turnover of over £2 billion. We have around 130 staff in specialist buying and support functions, and we're centrally located in the Midlands at Cranmore Park, where our head office doubles as an impressive conference and exhibition centre, which would normally be buzzing with industry shows at this time of year. In the absence of the live shows, we wanted to ensure that we continue to engage with our store members and provide relevant and useful information in the run-up to retail reopening in April and May, which we're all very excited about. So we're delighted to be introducing a series of live industry-focused webinars aimed at independent retail businesses. We have an exciting group of expert speakers covering topics from social media skills to customer engagement, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers for giving up their time to present these sessions. There'll be no corporate jargon, just interesting content that we hope you'll find useful. If you'd like to ask any questions, please do so in the chat. There's a speech bubble with a question mark in the top right-hand side of your screen, and you can type in any questions in there, and we'd be delighted to have your questions and feedback. I'm really happy to introduce Sally Fenwick to you, who is a buying and merchandising expert and consultant, who's going to be talking to us about merchandising and stock control upskilling. And when we refer to merchandising in this session, we're talking about stock control and financial merchandising as opposed to visual merchandising, as we've already done a session on that. So just a little bit about Sally. Sally has a wealth of varied buying, merchandising and procurement experience spanning multiple channels, so e-com and high street, within both the private and the public sector. Sally started her career in merchandising at Debenhams, where we actually worked together. So I was on the buying side and Sally was on the merchandising side. From there, Sally moved on to senior merchandising roles at small to mid-sized retailers, including a spell as head of direct at Royal Dalton. So working, moving from fashion to home. More recently, Sally has been consulting and acting as a project manager for various retail clients and has even taken professional procurement qualifications. Sally is currently working in category and range management at NHS Supply Chain and will shortly be embarking on a project to create a merchandising progress for us here at AIS. So without further ado, I am going to move over and hand over to Sally.
Thank you, Karen. How lovely to be here. Thanks for having me. So, merchandising, what is it? Really, merchandising is the science behind buying. It's the objective analytics that will help to inform and support any of your buying decisions. And as you've heard from so many of the speakers over the last 2 days, we always focus on who our customers are, who they are, how do they shop, what do they need when they shop, where in your shops do they go, and when do they spend their money. The objectives and purpose of any merchandising function is to really capitalise on revenue and product. And what we're all about is matching buy with demand, reducing the amount of loss of profit in markdown, and really looking for economies of scale and efficiencies. And we are also there to help look at service and proposition. What's really important about merchandising and buying, I suppose, is that it's iterative, it's circular. Most businesses evolve, they don't revolutionise, and we're always learning. We examine all of metrics, looking at all of our key performance indicators, the customer, the proposition, what's going on outside in the market, our suppliers, and the layout of the shop. And really, merchandising is a formal methodology. You know, you can build process, you can build toolkits, you can build suites of documents and reports so that you get a consistent approach. And really, to do successful merchandising, basically the principles and practices of merchandising remain the same, but what you always need is a database. So a database that holds your product information and that can hold your transactions. And this could be as simple as a till system in a single shop, or it could be a very large system in a much larger business. But the principles and practices are the same, and I reckon that the impact on the decisions and the benefits that you get will be the same, regardless of size or regardless of channel.
Mm-hmm. And so you don't need a really sort of like an expensive ERP system. You can actually operate these techniques from a till system.
Absolutely, because as long as you're capturing the sale from a barcode, then you can register that transaction along with everything that is going with that transaction against that particular line. And from there, you can build all sorts of intelligence.
Okay, great.
Thank you. So what this slide is trying to demonstrate is the circular and the cycle of buying and merchandising, that it is iterative, it is circular, and it's continual learning, with the customer at the very centre of those 4 boxes. Always with merchandising, it's underpinned by the capture of accurate data. So the better your data, the better the decision making that you'll be able to make. And you can build a suite of reports that sits with all of that data. And if you can build those reports that are available almost at a click, then you can spend less time interrogating the data and a lot more time and energy doing the fun stuff, which is the investigation, the recommendation, and the acting. So for review is about looking at the past. It's looking at the history, learning as much as you can about the history. Looking at performance, looking at the contribution of performance at line level, category level, attribute level. Then you're moving on to planning. So you've learned about the history, you move on to a plan, and you're trying to build ranges that work economically. Top down meeting bottom up, so that you're not overbuying. You look at in-store layout and density, like Katie was talking about, and you also look at the external factors, so the market, the supply, the trends, and you create the range plan. Then you fulfill it. So you bring that range to life by executing your plan. And then what the timing and the frequency of the review, the plan and the fulfill will largely depend on the type of business you are and your buying calendar. But what you are doing all the time is trading. Trading is ongoing, it's continual learning. You do it every day, every week, every month, and annually.
Mm-hmm. And so you could be running these processes concurrently because you are trading your current stock and analysing your current sales, but also planning for future seasons.
Yes. So everything, almost all of these phases you could be doing all at the same time, and absolutely underpinning it is this notion of getting as accurate data as you can to be able to analyse where you are. So what do we do to get started? Hierarchy is actually really important because it sits at the heart of understanding the customer, understanding how our customers shop. It enables us to group like products together in a formal way to see trends emerging. We can compare performance, we can understand whether the layout of our shop is working and whether the range that you've got is giving you the best possible return. And the principles of hierarchy is that the lowest level will always be your line, and your line is only ever attached once. So it's like the leaf that attaches to a twig, which attaches to a branch, which attaches to a bigger branch, which attaches to the trunk. So effectively you're building a tree. So the larger you are at your division, the more lines, the more value of sales, and then you go down all the way down to line level. And I've put together, just added some industry examples on the right hand side from where I've been. And the one I want to point to is the one from the NHS supply chain. So I joined there a little while ago, a few years ago, to really help see if retail merchandising principles you could use in the NHS on their online business to sell medical devices, clinical consumables for the NHS. So when we established that the principles could be applied to the NHS, we then rolled it out. And when I joined, there was no hierarchy attached to any line. So in this example on general medical, and you were looking at dressings, you either looked at all 7,500 lines or you looked at one individual line. That was impossible to get your arms around and to understand performance, compare lines, understand which were your best sellers. So comparisons were absolutely impossible. You couldn't compare price, you couldn't compare choice, you couldn't compare quality, you couldn't compare anything on product specification. And at the same time, as we were looking at this, Lord Carter, I don't know if any of you remember this, but there was a Lord Carter report on the NHS, and he was talking about the inefficiency of the massive range, the unwarranted variation, the number of prices for the same product that they were selling. So he talked about examination gloves coming under 10 prices in the NHS. So absolutely hierarchy was important to unlocking value. And as soon as we started thinking about that, we realised that we couldn't do it without the customer. The customer in this case was the clinician. So the clinician needed to be brought on board to give their product knowledge so that you end up with an NHS clinician-led hierarchy that informs the product specification for the NHS. So in this particular example, we have a category called vascular therapy within dressings, which is still 1,200 lines, still an enormous amount of money. But when you get down to the compression garment within vascular therapy, you've got 68 lines. And you've got a smaller amount of money, so you've got a chance of understanding what that product is and which are the best products, which offer the best value for the NHS in that group.
Mm-hmm. So that was really applying a retail concept. So that could have been sort of denim jeans, for example.
Yeah.
Equate to denim jeans, that would be a different leg cut, a different denim wash. So you were applying those retail principles to the NHS.
Yes, and trying to establish where you could drive best value out of that smaller group of lines. And then the next thing we do on getting started with range, with merchandising, is to understand the key performance indicators for the business. So I've listed here a number of metrics, the ones that we would all probably understand or have in our businesses, but it's by no means an exhaustive list. You know, if you were an online business, you might be looking at number of clicks or conversion rate or something. But the important thing here is that you all work together. Buyers, merchandising, finance people, IT people, you all work together to determine what's important for your business. And you make those metrics the basis for all the reporting that you do. And what you're trying to do here is turn data into intelligence. And going over to the right-hand side on performance measures, that's about trying to bring to life the data and looking at some comparisons. So the obvious one is, say, number of weeks or number of days of cover is a really good indicator of how fast something's moving is probably a determinant of whether it's a really good seller or not. And the level of discount that you give away might be a really good determinant on, again, whether it's a good seller. You know, if your net margin is very low compared to your buy-in margin, likely that it's not going to be a good line for you, because you have to give it away. Yeah,
because you've had to discount it so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
The margin is negligible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the one on the bottom there, open to buy, is about looking at how much intake you require to fulfill your sales number. So you always start with sales, and then you're looking at how much stock do I need to achieve that sales number.
Mm-hmm. And when you're looking at establishing your sales number, would you look at the previous season or the previous year's performance to inform your new sales budget?
Always look at history, but you could also look at, you know, what place you have in the market, so the way the external market's moving, or what you think's happening with the economy. That will all help to give you an informed view of what your sales forecast is going to be. And then in the middle, it's all about the dimensions. So how often do you want to review your metrics? You want to be able to review all your metrics at all the different varying levels of the hierarchy. We'll come on to talk about attribute, and as Katie was saying, if there's a way that you can also understand sales and space, you've got a fighting chance of making the better use of your space. So how do you analyse what Katie was talking about in terms of layout and visual merchandising? Thanks, Karen. So if we go back to the wheel that we talked about, and we start with review, that is a step-by-step approach to analysing, reviewing the history, whether it's last week or last year or the last 6 months, and it will inform the range plan and sourcing strategy. And what I've put up on this screen is an idea of the type of report that you'd look at. So you look at, you know, a block of performance from 1 year versus a block of performance from the previous year in the same time dimension. And what you're looking at is all the drivers, so strategic, customer, operational, and really what you're thinking about is about exit, retention and expansion. To go back to your point, really, is there something that I can glean from all of this that helps me to understand where I could have done better or where I should really have planned for less sales?
Yeah. In fact, your terminology, I've always called it grow, maintain, decline, but it's a similar concept, really, where you might review categories and think, why have I got 30% of my range in jeans when I'm only selling 20%? So just understanding it sort of in a top line way by category. Yeah.
And then another really interesting way of slicing your range is to think about attributing it. So if you assign a tag literally to your database, then you can analyze using that tag, and we call that attributing. It's the same thing, but what you're looking for is every line you analyze, you're looking for its unique place in the range. You know, if you think about going back to Jane Kellock's talk on trend, what you're doing here is you're saying, I had all these trends, I had all these stories. How well did each of them perform, or how well is each of them performing in my current season? And attributes will enable you to instantly see how well it's performing. So you could look at, you know, the rate of sale of never out of stock lines versus key lines. You could look at continuity lines, so your basic pair of white pants versus your, I don't know, trendy lingerie, whatever that is these days. You could look at, and what we were doing in the NHS, for example, was looking at what's business critical versus life critical. Life critical products, you got to have them, even though the rate of sale hopefully is very low, because they're all about life criticality, innovation, etc. Colour, size, supplier, and what you're looking at is you're just taking all your metrics from the previous slides, so all your key performance indicators for your business, and you're looking at them by attribute. Mm-hmm.
And could you vary your KPIs depending on how granular you wanted to get? So you could say, you know, I don't have that much resource, but I want to know how one category is performing against another, rather than wanting to get into colour and size, for example.
Yes.
So you can cut it any which way and it would still be
as long
useful.
As you're capturing your data at line level from the barcode, you can cut and slice that data in any which way you want, and you can predetermine the reporting so that you've got it there as almost at the click of a button, so that it's instantly available to you. And you can decide how often. Generally with businesses, it's how often they analyse this. You know, so not everybody has the resource to look at all this stuff daily, and actually it wouldn't tell you very much. So you think about how often you want to review all of this data. Quite a lot of people just look at it monthly. To do it any more often, you're not learning an awful lot. Mm-hmm. And then the contribution one on the bottom is really important, I think, because you're looking at really understanding how many lines drive your sales. And I really believe in the 80-20 rule in retail. You can see here from this example, you know, 30 on that category XXX, 13% of the lines were driving half of all the sales. Those lines each sold nearly 14,000 units against the bottom 20% of 1,200. That's quite telling, and really important when it comes to thinking about the range structure for the following season, making sure that you always have enough money set aside for those noose lines, those never out of stock bestsellers. Yeah. And really thinking about which lines you need to ditch, because they contribute nothing and probably cost you a lot of money in discount.
Some of the other speakers have talked about the 80-20 rule, and I think I've noticed it in whatever retailer I've worked in. I think you need a certain amount of product, which would be your trend and your dressing. So you wouldn't sort of like cut out extra lines completely, but I think that you could waste a lot of time buying a lot of lines that don't actually sell that much.
Yes. So the window dressing is important. You know, a shop full of white pants or a shop full of black trousers is not going to float anyone's boat. However, there's probably a line that you want to try and tread. And merchandising is all about absolutely getting to the intelligence so that it's indisputable, the 80-20 rule, because you've literally got facts to support it. And I think you and I would probably agree that what you need to do is you need to formalise this. So you need to sit down as a group of people and really go through all of the information, internal, external, buying, merchandising, informal range review meetings where you decide on the actions and the next steps and you move forward. And you also want to articulate the data, so you want to context it in maybe a lessons learned document or a kind of problem solving type situation target proposal. So you're getting into a little bit of category management. What were the opportunities? What might be the quick wins? And the important one, I suppose, is understanding the competitor.
Yeah, and I think all of those aspects would inform your final decision and your range construction.
Yeah.
I mean, earlier I mentioned the grow, maintain, decline, which is my sort of like my phrase, but you know, I'm thinking in previous roles I would have looked at categories. So when I was working at Disney, for example, we'd look in homeware, we'd look at how mugs were selling against plates, against snow globes, things like that. So we could actually just frame how much we wanted to spend on those categories the following season.
Yeah, and the important thing here is that you never do, there's never any one discipline in retail that is you can take in isolation of the other. You need to look at everything in the round. You know, if everything was merchandising based, it would be a very dull shop indeed. In the same way that if everything was visual merchandising or trend, you probably wouldn't survive from a business point of view. So it's about considering all of it in the whole. So that's a view of review. Then we move on to plan. And my example here that I've worked up is about using space, but you don't have to use space, and space in some businesses is not relevant, especially, you know, if they're online. But if you use space, then what you're asking yourself is, how do I want my store to look, my department to look? And really, from a merchandising point of view, can I make it work economically? So going back to what Katie was talking about, you're adding the science to the layout. So she talked about prime, secondary and discovery space. If you try and plan your ranges in those types of layouts, then this adds the numbers to support that. And what I've found in my career in terms of working in shops is this takes the emotion out of deciding how many lines should be in a range. There's always quite a lot of tension between a buyer and a merchandiser when it comes to looking at how many lines to buy. A buyer will always want loads. A merchandiser will always want to restrict it. And space-based planning will also make sure that you determine enough space for your best sellers. So going back to that example before, if you're going to sell 14,000 units of a line in a given period of time, you need to understand how often you're going to be filling that up on the shop floor if you only ever have 2 of them out. If you have 50 of them out, you've got more of a fighting chance of making sure that you never lose the sale. So you're thinking about the resource, you're thinking about filling up from the stock room, you're thinking about how much stock do I need in my shop at any one time for that bestseller, and how am I rotating it? So this example says, let's put my sales on by category or by attribute. Let's think about how much total space I've got. So I start with literally a blank sheet of paper with my fixtures on, and I say, how do I want my store to look? You think about how many lines you want on each prong or each measure of space. And then what this range plan document does is it tests the economics of that by looking at how many units you think you're going to sell of a line versus how much number of units you're going to display of a line if you work to that layout plan, if that makes some sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the output of your planning is your range plan, and it's the list of all of the lines that you're going to have in your range. And you know, people call it the Bible. Yeah, but it's effectively your product database.
Yeah. We've in any industry that I've worked in, any retailer, we've always referred to that as the Bible, because that is where you hold all your information about what you are buying.
Yes, and it's the golden thread. So it links everything, because this is effectively your product database, and you attach to it all the transactions. So what you assign in your range plan is all the attributes that you want to use, the categories that the line belongs to, who the supplier's from, what the colour is, what the size is, so that effectively all those KPIs that we talked about at the beginning are all attached to each individual line. And then what a merchandiser will do is come along after the buyer has determined the actual range and you've assigned which is going to be what you think is going to be your core lines versus your trend lines, and they will put a sales plan against every single one of those lines, and that line detail sales plan will add up to what your category plan is. So that's about the bottom meeting the top, so everything stacks up, and it's all very logical.
Yeah. And if you are a smaller store who might not have the resource to take this approach to every single category or every single product type even that you are buying, do you think it would add value even if you were to do that selectively?
I think it would add value if you did it selectively, but my contention would be this is your money. You know, you need to decide how much control you want over the money that you're spending, and looking at how many units I think I'm going to sell of every line is about controlling your money, your open to buy. And then the same way that we did on review, you don't ever do numbers in isolation. You also consider all the other external factors, and you build in a marketing and promotions calendar. You probably sit down together in a meeting, you decide, you agree that that's the range you're going to go for, and you then go out and fulfill it and make it come to life. And then trading is all about delivering benefit throughout the life of the range. Old lines, new lines, existing lines. How can we optimize, for a little bit of jargon, how can we optimize the sales, our margin, and how we use our space? So you're looking at performance versus plan versus the previous year. You're looking at hierarchy, you're looking at all the attributes you've got, and you're effectively trying to repeat the best and exit the worst as you go. And you're doing different parts of this type of analysis daily, weekly, monthly. And if you have, as I keep saying, if you have all of these reports at the click of a button, then you've got a fighting chance of investigating the data and not interrogating it.
Mm-hmm.
And as with review and as with plan, in trading as well, you would sit down together and do formal trading meetings, really interrogate and actually understand whether you want to change the plan that you've got. Probably somewhere you've got a range plan that's about to come in, you might want to make adjustments to that. And the important thing I would say here is really have a look at your marketing and promotions activity. Really understand whether they are delivering the net profit that you want them to, or are they just cannibalizing sales from other more profitable lines.
So really focusing marketing campaigns around your highest revenue product, really.
Yeah, and making sure you buy for them. So an important part of trading, as we know now, is about marketing and promotions activity, especially in store. So you spend enough time thinking about making sure that you can launch a really good campaign, and then after the campaign's finished, analyze it. And then a very simple but effective document that I think all businesses that I've ever worked in use is on stock management is sales, stock and intake. So start with your sales, track your historical performance, plot in your forward sales based on usually forward weeks cover. So you take into account peaks and troughs of performance, plot what you need your stock level to be, and aim to hit that target level. Don't aim lower because you won't have enough stock, and try not to go over, or else you're ending up with a terminal stock or a markdown requirement. So you're always aiming to hit your intake number, and your intake number is just a function of the difference between what you've actually got and what you need to fulfill your sales number. So they call it sales stock and intake, weekly, monthly, however often you in your business you need to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's it from me. Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you,
Do you have
Sally.
any questions?
I have got some questions for you. Just thinking about, I mean, none of us have got a crystal ball, so there are going to be occasions where you buy far too much of a line. And I guess with this year that we've just had with the pandemic, there'll be some of our members who've got maybe lines from last spring, summer or autumn, winter. So, I mean, normally you might say, oh, if I've got a lot of terminal stock, I'm just going to slash and burn, mark it down. But actually, because of the unusual times that we're in, that might not be the correct approach. So what would be your answer to managing old stock and terminal stock at this kind of unusual time?
First of all, I'd make sure I had an accurate record of that stock. So I would use this time when the shops are shut to do a stock take to really understand what it is that I've got. I would then understand what categories that sits in. I would attribute it, so I'd understand how much of it was continuity, good product versus potentially terminal. And I'd be honest about where it sits in that spectrum of saleable versus non-saleable. I would then, you've got an informed decision to make about how much new to add to that. So how much on trend, going back to James' presentation, can I use to enliven that stock so that I can sell some of the more continuity stuff. Use visual merchandising, obviously. Try and improve the density in the shop so you can fit more stock in. And then take, armed with all of that intelligence, you might be looking at a tricky conversation with some of your suppliers perhaps, because chances are they've got a supply, they've got a pipeline as well. That would be my
yeah.
I think basically inform yourself from a merchandising point of view. Be honest, include it all, never hide a problem, always include all of the stock in the data that you've got.
Yeah.
Informed decision making.
I think actually I know that some of the brands have been quite flexible with moving around stock, but I think that, you know, I know from talking to some of our members that there are some lumps of stock which they are having to flow through into, you know, last spring into this spring, for example, and then there may be some last autumn winter that will go into this autumn winter, and they've adjusted budgets accordingly.
Yeah, I think adjusting your budgets accordingly, and if you don't want to mark it down, so it's important for your business that you can't slash and burn, because, you know, if effectively there is only probably a certain amount of footfall that you can drive through your store. You may be looking at other alternative ways of jobbing off the stock, or, you know, looking at external warehousing so you can store it for when it's right to come back to you and back into your shop.
Some questions from the chat. If we're only buying 2 or 3 of an item, how valuable do you think the sales data would be from a very small buy?
Very valuable. Every piece of intelligence and data that you've got is extraordinarily valuable to you. If you've only bought 6 of a line because you thought it wasn't going to, you know, it wasn't going to sell particularly well, but you sell 3 in the first week, that's 2 weeks cover. That is fantastic. We're all happy with that. If you buy And that 6 units is really important to you because it could be showing you an emerging trend. You know, the gold lame jumpsuit that you never thought was going to sell is fantastic. If you bought 50 of a line and you sold 1, that's not giving you a great return. So I think it actually, what you're looking for is looking at, that's where your performance measures really come into the fore, because you're looking at all of the measures in the round. So you don't want a report that just gives you sales and another report that just gives you stock, because you want to look at sales and stock together to understand what's good and what's bad or indifferent in terms of sales.
Mm-hmm. And just thinking again about these challenging times, historically, maybe some of our stores have filled their entire open to buy for a season. Yeah. Would you recommend that they put some flex into those budgets?
I would always recommend flexibility, because forecasting, as we all know, is largely impossible. None of us have a crystal ball. So you're making an educated and informed view of what you think your performance is going to be, broken down at every level. The chances of it actually happening that way, I would say they're not. So as much flexibility as you can give yourself, the better. But you have to bear in mind your buying calendar. So bear in mind your lead times, bear in mind, as I said, you're wanting to hit the stock level. If you don't hit your stock level that you require, then chances are you're going to lose sales. But yeah, you always want to give yourself flexibility to buy best.
It's a fine balance to tread, really.
It is. It's a very tricky balance. And what you tend to end up having conversations about is where you buy your product from. You know, that's the difference between long lead time, buying it from the Far East directly from a factory, get better margins, versus buying it locally. The margins might be slightly depressed. However, you've got the flexibility to buy more. And what businesses tend to do is to buy their known product further away, and their least known product, so their trend product, closer to home. So not every line will have the same margin attached to it. So there might be a very large span of margin, because it depends on where you're buying the product from, will determine perhaps how much margin you can apply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you might take a view that, you know, if your overall margin across the range was achieving your target, then you sort of like, you win some, you lose
absolutely, some. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then final question is it worth investing in a qualified merchandiser if you're a small independent?
Well, I think you know my answer to that. It's interesting because you know, qualification is an interesting concept when it comes to merchandising. It's not really like accountancy. So you build expertise through experience. I would say, you know, looking at analysing your business is really important. I would say that merchandising does offer a level of expertise and skill that not everybody can bring. You have to be numerate. You can't do it without being numerate. You have to be able to interrogate data. You have to have an understanding of IT. That's my answer.
Okay.
I suppose.
Thank you very much, Sally. And we've had some. We've just had a late question in. When going into markdown, what percentage reduction do you think is the most effective?
Oh my. I think it largely depends on the line itself, and depends on the line itself and how much of a dog, as we call them, it was in the past. And what people tend to do is they tend to mark down more gradually, don't they? You know, so they do 20% off and see how it works, and then 30% off, see how it works, half price and see how it works. That would be my view, if you can. But it will also depend on your customer reaction.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on the net margin would be my view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then another late question in. As a merchandiser, how would you resolve the issue of your required stock it being less than the minimum required buy for a brand? So some of the larger brands will have minimum order levels because they're working with some, I guess, larger retailers, and that is a problem that some of the small independents have.
I know. I think you have to make a considered decision. So it's about being informed in your decision making. My honest opinion is, if you're not selling enough to warrant that space on that fixture or that minimum order quantity, don't buy it. Don't buy it. It's going to be a problem for you. It will be terminal stock. You need to go and try really hard to renegotiate with the supplier and make a stand. In every smaller business or even in fashion merchandise, you always come up against these minimum order quantities. We did, didn't we, in previous companies that we've bought. My view would be, don't do it. Don't do it unless you absolutely have to, because it's terminal stock and it's your money.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we do come across.
I know, I'm sure you do.
Yeah, there are many brands, excuse me, some of the larger brands who are very inflexible. And if you want to stock that brand, you have to work around their parameters.
Their minimum order quantity.
Yeah. But maybe that is, buying the range more intelligently to suit your requirements. And maybe even focusing on products that could then transition from one season to another, so that you could
have a longer selling season. See if you can push some of the minimum order quantity back up the pipeline, so that you commit to buying that quantity, but maybe not all in one go. So you're spreading it over a longer period of time. At least then they're not invoicing for the whole quantity. And I suppose that's one of the advantages of AIS, because you can use your combined buying power to help smaller retailers.
Yeah. Oh, another late one. What would be the first KPI or a couple of KPIs that you would look at each day, week, month, if you had to select?
I would look at sales, volume and value, and stock, volume and value, because then I've got an understanding of my rate of sale against the stock that I've got.
Okay, I think that is the last question. We've had a couple of comments saying, not a question, but wanted to say how interesting and informative this
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all the attendees and your questions.
Thanks, Karen.
I'm going to close the session now.
Thank you.